We're ready.
Okay, welcome everybody to the July 19th regular meeting of the San Ramon Planning Commission. I called the meeting to order at 7 p.m. May I have the recording secretary please call roll?
Commissioner Kuznick? Here. Commissioner Marks? Absent. Commissioner Wallace? Absent. Vice Chair Edwards?
Present.
And Chair Alpert.
Here. Item 3, Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 4, public comments or written communication. At this time, members of the public may address the Planning Commission on any item not already included in tonight's agenda. Recording secretary, do we have any speaker cards?
We do not have any speaker cards for this item.
Do we have any late communications?
We do not have any late communication.
Great, thank you. Okay. If you are participating remotely, you may click the raise your hand button on your computer or *9 on your telephone to request to speak when public comment is being taken. Do we have any *9s or hands raised?
We do not.
Okay, give 1 second. Okay, I'll go ahead and close the public comment. Item 5, additions and revisions, we have none. Consent calendar, no items. Item 7, approval of the minutes. This is the minutes from the July 5th regular Planning Commission meeting. Do we have any discussion, questions, suggestions? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and take a vote here. We're going to try and use our iPads today. So press the green mover button to move.
I will move
Okay.
that we accept the minutes of the July 5th meeting.
Okay.
I will second.
Okay. Been moved by Commissioner Kuznick and seconded by Vice Chair Edwards. Go ahead and press the vote button. Okay. Passes 3-0-0-0. I think the third zero is the absence. Okay. Item 8, continued items after closing public hearing. There are none. Item 9, continued items open the public meeting. There are none. Item 10, public hearing, new items, there are none. And item 11, non-public hearing items, there are none. We're up to tonight's agenda item. Item 12, a study session. I'm getting ahead of myself on the script. At this time, we're going to have a presentation discussion on the draft economic element policies and the 2022 retail analysis. And I think we have a staff report by Cindy.
Well, thank you and good evening, planning commissioners. This evening, I will be providing just a quick overview and then turning it over to the city's consultant, Roger Dale with the Nelson Dale Group, to provide a presentation on the retail analysis. And so I'll go ahead and just cover just the first part of the staff report on economic development element. The staff report identifies that the economic development element was last updated in 2018, and the current update as part of the General Plan 2040 update really builds on the land use and economic strategies that were set forth in that 2018 document. It really needs to consider recent and ongoing changes in the retail industry, including shifts with shopping patterns due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As you can see in attachment A, we've provided red line track changes of the existing economic development element policies. There are 5 existing guiding policies, and we are not proposing any changes to those existing guiding policies. There are 26 implementing policies. Staff's recommending adding 2 additional implementing policies. One that speaks to the development standards for the non-commercial developments within shopping centers, as well as establishing a system for the coordination of specific plan areas. In addition, there will be some minor edits and clarifications to the existing policies. These policies will then be used to update the economic element along with updating the background and narrative information. And we're expecting that that draft element will be available later this fall for your review. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Roger Dale with the Nelson Dale Group. He is our teaming partner on the retail development opportunities analysis, and he'll provide an overview of the document.
Good evening, Chair Alpert and members of the commission. And thank you, Cindy. I'm Roger Dale with the Nelson Dale Group, and we are a part of the city's consultant team for the general plan update, and specifically looking at the economic aspects of that work. And as part of that effort, we have completed a market analysis that specifically looks at opportunities for future retail development in San Ramon. And I'd like to briefly highlight some of the findings of that work and some potential policy implications, and then glad to take your comments and questions. So as I mentioned, we're part of the general plan update team. And as part of that, we've completed 2 economic studies. The first is what I would describe as a broad market study that looked at retail, office, industrial, and hotel land uses. And then after completing that, we did a more in-depth look at retail commercial opportunities. And that was of specific interest to the city because it was an update to a prior study from about 5 years ago, 2017. And the city was interested in comparing the market then as it is now, and understanding what the opportunities might be moving forward for new or revitalized retail development in the city. So just briefly going back to that broad market study that addressed several land uses, we looked at retail, and I'm going to be diving into this in more depth, but just to give you some of the bottom line numbers, your existing square footage of retail space in San Ramon is about 2.7 million square feet. And we are projecting future incremental demand through the year 2040 of about 1.1 to 1.8 million square feet. And I'll come back to that in much greater detail as we move ahead this evening. Then some of the other land uses, office, you've got 9.5 million existing square feet, and we're showing a potential increment of demand of 500,000 to 750,000 square feet through 2040. Industrial is much less present in San Ramon. As you know, it's about 800,000 square feet of existing competitive space, and the future demand there might be in the range of 250,000 to 500,000 square feet. And then the last category we looked at is hotel development. Your existing inventory is about 1,100 rooms, 1,147. And we projected future incremental demand of 317 rooms, about 259 rooms of which is already accounted for by approved projects that have not been built yet. And it's interesting, in the hotel category, that looks like a fairly small increment when we consider that most of it's already accounted for, but there hasn't been any new hotel development in the city for many, many years. So it's kind of a catch-up mode. And we would project that that's going to pretty much take care of your need through about the next 20 years. I'm going to talk now about how your existing retail facilities perform in terms of what we call capture rates. And that's just a term that means if we look at the amount of spending that San Ramon residents do on retail goods and services, and compare that to how much money is actually captured in the city, and we can get that directly from sales tax records, we can then determine how much of your theoretical market are you actually capturing. And so anything that you're not capturing is what is often called leakage. It's money that originates in your own residence, but is being spent in facilities outside the city. And we break this down by different retail categories. The first is a grouped category called, in the retail industry, called GAFO, and that's an acronym that stands for general merchandise, apparel, furniture, and other. And this is generally the type of merchandise mix you'd expect to see in a traditional regional shopping mall, the types of things that people would typically make a destination shopping event out of going to purchase. And this is an area where the city's capture rate is quite low compared to other categories. So as of now, you're only capturing about 45% of the potential resident demand in that category. And you can think of that as kind of good news, bad news. It's unfortunate that you're losing that opportunity and that it's causing residents to need to go outside the city to find those goods and services. But I guess on the good news side, it represents an opportunity for potential recapture of that demand without having to depend on future growth of population. There's a kind of a pool of demand that's already there that you're not fully capturing. So that translates to just about 750,000 square feet of demand today. And we'll talk about how realistic that is, but that theoretically it's about 750,000 square feet of GAFO demand that you could support today based on that leakage. Next category is food and beverage, essentially supermarkets and convenience stores. And here you're basically capturing your full resident demand. And this is typically what we would expect, that your residents are not typically going to drive long distances to buy basic goods like groceries. On the other hand, residents from other communities are not typically going to drive into a community to shop. So you'd expect it to about be equal to your resident demand. So there's not necessarily any incremental support in that category. I should mention, however, that these numbers were developed prior to the closure of Nob Hill. So theoretically, that frees up some demand that could be captured by new facilities, or could mean that you are in fact experiencing some short-term leakage in that category, or maybe just the remaining supermarkets are having better sales, but these numbers don't reflect that recent closure. Next category is food service and drinking, essentially restaurants. And here your capture rate is, I would say, is respectable, but still not 100%, about 71%. And again, that's something that would present an opportunity for future growth. That translates to about 90,000 square feet of demand that you could support right now. And I think this is a especially interesting category because it's, if we think about contemporary trends in retail development, a lot of them are built around restaurant, entertainment, and those types of activities. So that's in our mind, a key category for contemporary retail development opportunities. Hardware and building materials, you're actually capturing more than your fair share, which is a good thing in the sense that you've got a competitive edge in that category. However, that means there's probably not a lot of extra demand that you could expect to capture. You've kind of maxed that out. Motor vehicles and parts, you do relatively poorly. As I'm sure you're aware, you only capture about 20% of your resident demand. We don't typically translate that into square footage because it's not typically found in a shopping center setting. And this is something that San Ramon might not be positioned in terms of capacity to build car dealerships, but theoretically there's an unmet market there. And similarly with gas stations, you capture about 82%. Again, not typically the type of use you'd find in a shopping center or a large shopping center, but there may be some opportunities there for some recapture. So overall, you're capturing about 64%, about 2/3 of your resident demand, and that might support something just over 800,000 square feet of what we call residual space that you're basically losing to other communities. The numbers that I just mentioned are just looking at San Ramon's resident demand, just the city itself, and comparing those to existing sales. In reality, we know that you also capture some amount of demand from outside communities. And we have, in our full analysis, looked at a primary and secondary market area. So the primary market area is the city of San Ramon, and then the communities of Black Hawk, Camino to Sahara, and Norris Canyon. And then the secondary market area is Danville. And when we talk about a secondary market area, it's an area where we wouldn't expect you to capture a huge percentage of their demand because they've got their own facilities, but just based on proximity and some of the existing travel patterns, we know that you capture some already and could continue to do that in the future. We have intentionally avoided including in our market area areas to the north and south, including Walnut Creek, Dublin and Pleasanton, primarily because they're further away, of course, and they also have very well-developed retail facilities of their own, and it's a market that may be hard to recapture. So that may, in fact, mean that part of that leakage that I described, you're never going to really get to 100%. So this is just kind of a reality of the way this region has developed, that there's some areas that have kind of carved out portions of the regional market that it's not likely San Ramon would ever achieve 100% capture rate. So we've excluded those from our analysis. Not to say that you wouldn't occasionally get some expenditures from those areas, especially if there's something unique here that would draw them, but we're not really counting on it as part of our projections. So we have then projected out what would happen as the population grows, both in San Ramon and in that larger area that I showed on the map. That existing base of about 800,000 square feet of space that could be supported just by resident leakage, and then add to that secondary market area, plus future population growth through 2040. And these are not necessarily expected to be high growth communities, but over that period of time, incremental growth does add up, and it does translate into new demand for retail space. And we've done a lower scenario and a more aggressive high scenario. The difference is that we have estimated what your existing capture rates are of your resident demand, as well as that secondary market area demand. And in the low scenario, we've assumed that those capture rates stay the same. It's a growing population, so you can think of it as a growing pie, but your percentage of that pie is going to stay the same. The high scenario, we've bumped up some of those capture rates, just I would say fairly modestly, just to account for what might happen if you had some newer facilities to attract demand from outside, and again, apply that to future population growth, what would happen then? So between these two scenarios, we've got a total demand in the year 2040 of 1.1 million square feet of new space potentially by the year 2040. And then under the high scenario, that would be as high as 1.8 million. And we'll talk later about why some of that is theoretical, and probably in a practical sense, you wouldn't expect to capture that much. But these are just kind of raw numbers that show us what the spending potential is of the residents in the city as well as the surrounding areas. This next slide compares our analysis to the previous study that was done in 2017 by another firm, BAE. And so what we've done is kind of lay side by side some of the key variables. First of all, back in 2017, the city's total amount of existing retail space was 2.3 million square feet. And now it's about 400,000 square feet higher, 2.7 million square feet. And a lot of that, of course, pretty much all of it is attributable to the city center project that is opened in the meantime. Rents have basically kind of kept pace with inflation. So they were $250 in 2017 on average, and this is $1 per square foot, and $2.83 per square foot in the current market. So that's a reasonably strong indication that rents have at least kept pace with inflation. So then we look at this very important number of demand leakage. In 2017, the BAE study estimated that the leakage was 371 million, and we're actually showing less leakage, 280 million approximately. And again, it's the city center project that has recaptured some of that leakage that existed at that time. So in effect, you could say that the city has been successful in pursuing the opportunities that study outlined and kind of recommended the city pursue, and that kind of is a projection that was fulfilled. So similarly, if we look at the percentage of resident retail demand that was estimated to be captured in 2017, it was about 65%. That's gone up to 71%, again, because of that increase in sales due to primarily to the city center project. Then we look at the square footage supportable, and I'm going to adjust our numbers back to 2035. I mentioned that we have a projection year of 2040, but just to be comparable to what was done with the other study, on this chart specifically, we have adjusted this to 2035. So they, like our study, had a low and a high projection scenario. Under their low scenario for 2035, the projection was 600,000 square feet. And our study is showing that by 2035, the demand potential will be 800,000 square feet. And again, in 2035, for the 2017 study, the low scenario, or the high scenario was 1.2 million square feet, and we're showing about 1.4 million square feet. And again, remember, I talked about a number previously of 1.8 million, but that was 5 years further out in 2040. So, the reason for our numbers being higher are that everything has been kind of readjusted based on the higher capture rates. And you remember I explained that we kind of applied the existing capture rates to the future population growth. And so you've kind of gotten a bigger piece of the pie, and we're going to assume that that potentially could be maintained in the future as the population grows. So we have compared our study findings and our observations about the current market to what was done in 2017. And a lot of the things that were concluded then, I think, still apply. And we've just kind of highlighted some of these strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So what are the strengths that make San Ramon potentially an attractive retail market? You've got relatively high resident income and education levels, which are appealing to higher end retail stores. You've got a large and diverse employment base centered around Bishop Ranch and other projects that make this not only a strong resident population, but you've got a strong daytime population that potentially can spend money in your local stores and restaurants. And interestingly, your population growth has been stronger than was projected in the 2017 study. I'm sure through your work on the Planning Commission, you're all familiar with ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, and their periodic forecasts of population growth. And it was interesting that when the 2020 census numbers were released, as you may know, the city's population in 2020 was already higher than ABAG had projected 15 or more years out. So population is growing faster than was expected. And that's, whether that continues or not, we can't say, but at least you're at a stronger or larger base of population than was otherwise expected. So that again is a good indicator for retail opportunities. And in the retail industry, traditionally things are kind of driven by what they call rooftops. The more residents and households in a community, the more there's a need to go out and spend on basic goods and services. So that's very favorable. In terms of weaknesses, I've already mentioned that you're located between some strong competitors to the north and the south, and they've kind of carved out markets that may be hard for San Ramon to fully catch up to them. But we think there's still opportunities in there despite that. The area that's west of the 680 freeway is disadvantaged just because it's kind of outside the flow of traffic from outside and within the city as far as where retail shopping centers might be concentrated. So that's just kind of an inherent disadvantage for that part of the city for retail development. And then the last thing I'll mention here in terms of weaknesses is probably going to be the keynote of our whole conversation this evening, is that there is very limited land available for commercial development. This is mostly a built-out community, and so a lot of when we talk about these pretty large numbers in terms of demand projection, I'll kind of keep emphasizing or using the word theoretical. This is the potential that exists, but in reality, you're not going to necessarily have enough land to accommodate that, and there are other factors that might work against actually fully capturing that demand in the future. But it's a good starting point for the discussion. In terms of opportunities, we know that there are centers in the community that are in need of some repositioning or strengthening, and the fact that you do have an underlying strong market with demand provides some opportunities to do that. And then I think there's also an opportunity to build on the success of City Center. That's been a successful project in the midst of, through the pandemic and in the midst of an era where retail in general is kind of shrinking its footprint. You've got a strong example of what that large amount of leakage enables you to recapture or to develop in what otherwise might not be considered a really growing retail market. And then related to that, we'll talk about threats. And I've already alluded to it, the global changes in retail. We know that communities throughout the country are facing issues of shopping centers that have historically been strong that are under pressure now. They, in many cases, have There are fewer anchor tenants to anchor major shopping centers, and that has resulted in vacancies. And when shopping centers lose anchor tenants, also becomes a problem because the smaller tenants don't do as well and they tend to become vacant. So there is no question that the impacts of e-commerce on brick and mortar retail are real, and that has changed the retail environment. And again, I think that would be another reason why I would say that the somewhat large numbers I've talked about in terms of potential demand, a little bit theoretical, because when you think about shopping patterns and how they're changing over time, you do have to acknowledge the ongoing impacts of e-commerce. I would say, though, that because we've got such a large amount of leakage and your capture rate, and especially in that GAFO category, is already so low, that's kind of in a sense, that's kind of a remaining opportunity. Even if you kind of discount that by a big factor and say, well, you're only going to get half of that, it's still a pretty big number. So I think there's still potentially some numbers to work with there. And of course, all of this can translate into a potential loss of the city's sales tax base, which is a major concern for any city. And so we have positioned our recommendations for ways to think about retaining and strengthening the retail sales tax base, recognizing, though, that there are many challenges facing the industry. So we have laid out 3 very broad policy recommendations or strategy recommendations in our report. These will be kind of the basis for our next steps of our work in conjunction with the general plan team and city staff to translate these into more actionable policies. But the general, I guess, themes that we would like to emphasize, that we would like to see policies that would incentivize reinvestment in existing retail properties to maintain San Ramon's retail footprint. And we can talk about future growth, but the first and foremost, we want to see kind of maintaining that existing footprint, knowing that there may not be many opportunities for large scale retail development in other parts of the city because there simply aren't development sites for that type of development. Number 2 is to invest in a sustained retail tenant recruitment and marketing campaign. And this is an area where cities can take a very proactive role in working with their shopping center managers and owners and the development community to attract specific tenants that would be viable in the city that are not present here now. And in our report, we lay out a list of what I would describe as candidate tenants, and it's not intended to be an all-inclusive or comprehensive list. It's, in fact, we started with a list that was prepared in 2017 by the other study, kind of updated that, and I think a number of the things that were suggested then have been attracted or recruited to the city, so that's success. And then we looked at lists of other retail chains in California that have reported to be growing in other communities, and then identified, are these here already or not? And if they're not, we would consider them at least initially a candidate for attraction. So the city can have a proactive role in working with property owners that are landlords to kind of a coordinated way of attracting tenants and marketing San Ramon for the types of tenants that we think are viable here and that are not here now. And that can be, in effect, an incentive to shopping centers that are facing questions about how are they going to reoccupy vacated space. And then number 3 is to continue the city's comprehensive or holistic approach to economic development. And I think this is reflected in your economic development strategy and in the previous general plan economic development element, as well as we're updating now, as Cindy mentioned. But one of the concepts that we think is very strong is that the potential value of promoting mixed-use villages, where you would potentially consider a portion of what was a retail site to be devoted to housing. And we know that your housing element and other policies reflect this already. But that can be kind of an opportunity to address multiple objectives. We know that the city has a need to create more housing in response to your RENA obligations and other state policies. And it also can be a win-win in the sense that it can take a shopping center that is kind of distressed now and create an opportunity for that property owner to improve the financial viability of the overall project and also increase its close by population, which can then strengthen what what remains in terms of retail tenants because of an increased population in immediate proximity to their projects. All of this, though, these three things kind of involve a balancing act. We know that on one hand, we're saying the city should start from a premise that you'd like to not have a net loss in retail space. You're going to try to maintain your existing retail footprint. At the same time, consider in some cases opportunities for other land uses to be introduced. And I should emphasize that we haven't made any recommendations specific to any particular property, and we won't be doing that this evening. But that in general, the concept of mixed-use development we think has some merit for some shopping centers, and that can be something where you'd like to do it, but you'd like to evaluate it on a holistic or comprehensive level so that overall the city doesn't have a net loss in retail space. This all, of course, needs to start with retaining the tenants that are here now. We've talked about potentially attracting new tenants, but there are potential steps that the city can take to improve the environment that would retain retail tenants. And that's not to say that you would expect not to have continued store closures or vacancies. There's an ongoing turnover in the retail world, and that's probably going to accelerate over time. But the city can be helpful if, number one, you keep abreast of market trends. The things I'm talking about this evening are different from what you might have talked about 5 years ago, and 5 years in the future, things could be different again. So this is a very dynamic industry at the moment, and it's important for the city to kind of continue to keep on top of these trends if it's going to effectively work with property owners to achieve that balance of future development. One thing that some cities have been successful with is a business retention effort focused on retail tenants, outreach to specific tenants to understand the likelihood of their moving or leaving, closing, and understanding if there's anything the city might be in a position to do to relieve some of the pressure on those businesses and facilitate keeping them in the city longer than they otherwise would. And this could also involve coordination with landlords as leases expired. And this is where that concept of a tenant marketing or tenant recruitment plan would come in place. If the city is kind of serving as a marketing clearinghouse for retail activities, there could be opportunities to coordinate with landlords to backfill space that becomes vacant over time. And then, as I've already described, we think it's important to consider well-conceived plans to introduce other non-retail uses in older shopping centers, making the centers more viable locations for the remaining retail tenants. And again, I'm not going to comment specifically on individual properties, and we don't do that in the report. But we're just saying in theory, in concept, we support the idea of selected mixed-use projects where it represents a win-win for the city and the landowner. There might be opportunities for incentives through either tenants or larger properties where the city could invest, for example, in infrastructure or other investments that would make it more financially feasible for a property to remain in a retail use than would otherwise be the case. And then, as I kind of alluded to at the beginning, this is an evolving and dynamic market, and the policies need to reflect that and retain flexibility to adapt to those changes over time. In this type of an environment where retail is in some cases under distress, it's important to think also about maintaining the physical condition of your existing shopping centers. And we've kind of outlined some ideas from an economic perspective that would possibly work here. First of all, we would describe this as a dual approach. I mean, we're all familiar with the concept of code enforcement, and that's important to have a strong program there. But at the end of the day, if a shopping center is not financially viable, it's going to be kind of a losing battle to expect the property owners to reinvest in it and maintain it at the level that the city would expect. So you start with strong code enforcement, of course, but you also want to have meaningful incentives in terms of ability for flexibility of land uses and so on that can keep those centers strong and incentivize reinvestment, really. I think it's helpful also to define clear standards and perhaps have the buy-in or input of major property owners and how those are set, so that when we talk about code enforcement and standards for maintenance, there's kind of a mutual agreement about what the standards should be. The city could kind of monitor that through regular site visits to check conditions. Again, kind of not necessarily doing that just strictly from a code enforcement basis, but from a basis of trying to identify where are there opportunities for the city to support reinvestment. We've already talked about supporting marketing efforts for retail tenant recruitment. It's a lot easier to talk about maintaining a space that has a tenant in it than one that's vacant. And so support and keeping occupancy rates high is a kind of a good barrier against declining property conditions. And then you could also think about opportunities for the city to serve in kind of a clearinghouse capacity for centers or groups of centers to have a structured funding source to support the maintenance in a way that's feasible. And this could be, for example, a business improvement district or other type of assessment district that would support that in a way that is financially feasible to the property owners as well as the individual tenants. At this point, I'd be glad to take a break and hear your comments or any questions you might have. And again, I want to thank you for having me here this evening, and really excited about the opportunity to work in San Ramon. So thank you.
Thank you, Roger. At this point, we could either have some clarifying questions, or do we have anybody in the audience that would, maybe we'll take the questions from the audience first, if we have any first, and then we'll open public comment and take questions or comments if we have any.
So we did receive 2 late communication items, one from TRC Retail and one from Federal Realty. Those were provided to the Planning Commission prior to tonight's meeting. We do have one hand raised in the audience.
Why don't we go ahead and take the public comment first?
Okay. Call in user 1.
Go ahead and speak when you're ready.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I have a question and a comment. When I first dialed in, I heard the presenter said that the 3 million, close to 3 million leakage, some of them is irreversible, and that's just the way the city is has developed. I'm wondering what kind of matrix or factors did he use to come to that conclusion? Living out here, bordering San Ramon and Dublin, I pretty much go to Dublin sometimes. It's because of distance and also convenience, because it's just easier to go that way instead of the other way to, get a lot of services done. And, if there is hardly any land zoned for retail here in Windermere, Gill Ranch area, wouldn't that be wise for the city to consider release some more land, or, create opportunities for more retail spaces? I'm not sure, instead of trying to mitigate a problem, I am sensing that the city's approach is more like, that's how it is, and it is what it is. And I'm a little bit befuddled about that. Also, in the future, the near future, there will be a lot more land released on the east side, close to 680. And I'm wondering if those areas are going to be strictly residential, or is there going to be more opportunities for retail, commercial, as well as maybe schools, such as in Dublin, there are business such as they can film your golfing shots and then sort of like provide a finer tuning of your golfing skill, and it's indoor. So I'm wondering if those kind of businesses can possibly be allowed to come into San Ramon. And I would also like to see a lot more family-friendly restaurants that are mainstream American. I feel San Ramon business is so Asian that I sometimes don't think that I live in America, and that's
Can I ask
really
you
too
to stop?
bad. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any other hands raised?
We do have another hand raised.
Okay.
Jim Blickenstaff.
Okay. Go ahead, Jim, when you're ready.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Yeah, I think a couple of things are relevant here. I perused the study a little bit, and I think there's a lot of information from 2017 that may mislead people in a certain way. On page 44, for example, they say San Ramon and maybe some neighboring areas are more or less built out. And that's erroneous because the latest developments, literally, with state mandates, et cetera. So we're far from built out. In the next 8 years, we're likely to have 12,000 more people from all the units going in. A lot of that's in Bishop Ranch. A lot of that's close to the marketplace. I'm just saying there are certain categories of opportunities here in the local area that are already in place that are kind of unique and don't automatically fit into a convenient category of a broad study. Marketplace is one of those, very unique. It's been serving the community for 30 some years, sustainable, profitable marketplace with an anchor store, which actually is very key to success. And it's under threat of being replaced primarily just by housing. And of course, from my point of view, that's a very bad trade-off because more housing and removing an area that's proven itself as a successful retail center would be a mistake. So I'd say that's an example of maybe what we have to take care of because you only get one chance to do it right. And you can't come back and say, we'll put something there later. So let's be very thoughtful and responsible and comprehensive about areas that actually will serve the needs of the community. They've already proven it. And I really say community as compared to the in-and-out stores that are next to the freeway, like Safeway, that have their own base of support. But we have a place here that serves the community, is very successful. And then I do take heart in page 21 of the review by staff, where they have 3 points. Maximize your efforts to retain and enhance places that are already here because land prices are so expensive and it's very difficult to find a profitable area to put in a store because of costs. And you already have one in place at Marketplace. And then incentivize people, be proactive in getting people to come and look at it, to maybe give them some incentives for the first 3 to 5 years to get their store set up. But a grocery store is about the best anchor store you can have. People have to have food every day. And it's not vulnerable the way some stores are to Amazon or some of these online services because groceries, the perishables and all the other things that make it difficult. So they can get a lot of customer base from orders online as well as in person. So
Can I ask you to start to wrap up, please?
okay. So I just want to say thank you very much for that. And I hope you'll consider those recommendations by staff.
Thank you. Do we have any more hands raised?
Susan Ferris Vanderkam.
Okay. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, commissioners. Hopefully you can hear me. I wanted to just pick up on some of the comments that Jim was making around the recommendations about incentivizing reinvestment into existing retail properties, et cetera, as well as the suggestion of developing a more coordinated retail recruitment, and also the suggestion that we look into having regular tenant owner meetings and reviews on properties. I think all of those are really great ideas. As one of the founding members of Responsible Growth San Ramon and Campad, we have just recently started working with Mike Elliott to deal with some of the code issues with Marketplace. But my concern is that these recommendations and stuff are not going to be implemented in time to keep the Marketplace a viable retail center. And I don't know how I stress the urgency, but I don't see where we really have any of the retail recruitment type of organizations in place, nor do we have anything that I'm aware of where you regularly meet with tenants in order to retain existing retail. So my concern really is that there needs to be a sense of urgency about doing that, because again, once we lose the retail that we have, I don't think you're going to see a lot of build out, because you're going to be constantly chasing those RENA numbers. And so any office buildings that come down are most likely going to become housing. And my last comment is just that you keep stressing the villages, and I understand that. But one of the things that has made San Ramon so great over the 37 years I've lived here is the sense of community. And that was a sense of community that you got by going to a community retail center like the Marketplace. The concept of the villages really, to me, is counterproductive to that kind of citywide sense of community. So I just ask you to keep those things in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all we have.
Okay, thank you. I'll go ahead and close public comment. Commissioners, do we have questions of staff or of Rudder? Commissioner Kuznick.
Thank you. So one of the concerns I have in reading this report is the statistic related to home improvement and landscaping, and that the numbers right now, our capture rate is very robust, 141%. And I recall in a previous analysis that sales tax generation in San Ramon, our number one was in fact Morgan's Masonry. And, we are looking at people who want to come in and replace that business with housing. And I think, being on this commission, that is, well, that one we know of. And, that one is really problematic in terms of our retail. And I don't see how we kind of get around that, and to lose 141% is kind of a big hit. So I know that this is more of a rhetorical statement rather than a question. Any advice? I guess that would be the question. So what do you think?
Well, I am not familiar with that particular business, what the sales are and so on. Typically, if there were a proposal on a particular piece of property that is known to be important for sales tax, there could be a requirement for a fiscal impact analysis. It looks at what's going to happen if the city loses this, and compare that to what is it going to gain potentially from other types of development, which would involve its own revenues and its own costs, and to weigh that as part of the decision. Beyond that, it's just a choice the community has to make, and recognizing you've got a property owner that's got, wants to pursue opportunities, and you've also got a need to protect the city's revenue base. So no specific recommendations on that. It's not easy.
Yeah, through the chair, if I may. So the home improvement category, and correct me if I'm wrong, does not only include Morgan's, it includes Home Depot, Ace, paint stores. So it's just not Morgan's. So there are a number of retailers in San Ramon that do fall into that community.
Other questions at this time? No.
Go ahead.
I think I do have questions. Myself organized a little bit. I guess the first question I think would probably be to staff. And could you highlight for us, we have an EDSP, an Economic Development Strategic Plan, that has policies and it has implementation. I think it's called actions versus policies. And then we have a general plan economic element that has policies. Could you explain, just for clarifying, they work in conjunction and sometimes there's overlap and sometimes there's more specificity in the EDSP. Is our goal as part of the general plan update to focus on the economic element and the EDSP, or just the economic element?
So the goal of this event, or what we're doing right now, is really just to focus on the economic element.
Mhm.
I would presume, as we did in 2017 or right around that time, or 2015, I guess, we did update the economic
Mhm.
strategic plan. And so I would presume that once we complete the general plan update, some point next year, there will be documents that will fall out of that will need to be updated, such
Mhm.
as, we just finished the Parks Master Plan, for example. So the Economic Development Strategic Plan will be one of those that I'm sure we will be having to look at down the road.
Thank you. And it was 2019 we updated. It wasn't that long ago. So it's a pretty good.
Oh, was it
plan.
2019?
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
retail
so-
study, then the EDSP. That's
Right. And I just wanted to
correct.
make sure that we're not getting sideways and out of order, because the EDSP is pretty specific with a lot of really good specific strategies to follow. And so, okay.
Correctly, yeah.
Okay. For clarification, 1 million additional square feet potential, and as I heard you and I read the report, that seems like that's largely driven by trying to attempt to capture the leakage plus population increase. Is that the two?
Those
that-
are the two drivers,
Okay.
yes. Mhm.
And 1.1 million square feet, that seems like a lot, a lot of square feet compared to our current base of 2.7 million. But, and then I think you also drove down the 1.1 million-ish plus or minus down to the specific categories. Is that my
Yes.
understanding of the report?
Mhm.
And that was really just primarily driven by just sort of percent that we're losing today, trying to bring it back to close to zero leakage. Is that the approach that we take on
Well,
this?
it's really, it's partly leakage, but it's really partly maintaining a fairly conservative assumption about what your capture rate is and just applying that to future population growth.
Okay.
And so, one of our call-in comments was about, and I don't know if this number is exactly the same as our report, but 12,000 new residents, that adds a significant percentage to your population. And you would expect your need for retail space to kind of go up in proportion to population. So it's I think mostly driven by population growth, and a part of that is just the leakage.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And vacancy rates, you compared in the last study at 2.9 to 5.5. What's a normal range for in a retail environment?
We would normally say anything under 5% is very good. In some communities, like during a recession or during a period of time where things are challenged, it could get up to maybe 10%.
Okay.
Anything above that would be a real concern.
Okay.
So you're still in the range of what we would consider overall a healthy market. Now that doesn't mean that each center has that 5%. That's an average. Some may be higher. And when they get up above 5, especially above 10%, then we would be concerned about what the viability of a property is at that point, and it might need some attention.
Okay. Thank you. As far as the study goes, my impression was it was a very macro external. Was there much in the way of micro analysis? By that I mean working with the retailers or the tenants or the landlords, or to see what challenges they face in this current environment?
It
or
really
was
has
it-
not been at a specific property level. I mean, we've applied here the kind of standard methodology in the industry for doing this type of a study. We've compared it to existing data for example, sales tax. So we know how much the sales are in different categories. We've not gone out and assessed vacancy rates for individual properties. We've kind of relied on published data for that, but those things are always in flux. And so
Mhm.
it's likely there's some things, maybe some centers may have higher vacancy rates than we have shown here, just because data source didn't pick that up in a timely way.
Okay. Is part of the process going forward to refine the policies, would that include seeking input from the retailers, at the store level, but maybe the shopping center owners to, for instance, would a business improvement district ever fly in the city, or would
Yes.
so it is.
I think a
included.
number of those recommendations would call for that kind of interface with both tenants. We talked about a business retention survey, kind of direct outreach to the tenant community, as well as talking to property owners about standards for maintenance, the concept of a business improvement district, other things that we may not have thought of that they would bring to the table as ideas where the city might have a role in moving things forward.
Okay. And then looking to Debbie and Cindy, tonight, it's not so much about how we do this, it's the big picture for policies for the general plan. So making a recommendation to do a survey would not really be appropriate for a general plan level, or should it? That's just kind of.
That is correct. So that would come in the form of the EDSP update. And I believe that strategy already is in the current
is, it is,
EDSP. And I
yeah.
think one was done, we did the 50-50 or
15, yes, that's. I was
50
gonna
and
mention that.
50 or
Yeah.
something like that.
50 and 52. So that was
Yes.
when I was chair of EDAC. So,
Right.
yeah.
And so we have done that kind of outreach before. It was more to the businesses, the office parks, I believe.
It was.
So yeah, so that would fall out of the EDSP. But for tonight, really, it's just to give some feedback on the retail study itself. It's the document we are working with going forward with this
Right.
update and forming those new economic policies and refining what we have. So we're looking for good comments and feedback, and your questions tonight have been great. And we can take those questions after we wrap up tonight, and we'll be working with Roger and our team
Great.
on how to move forward to the next step in addressing these mixed use concerns that we're hearing.
Thank you.
And I would say that this retail study kind of serves two purposes. It's part of the general plan process, but some of the recommendations go beyond what you would include in economic development policies for a general plan. When you talk about an economic development element of a general plan, you got to keep in mind that general plans aren't updated that often. So we're kind of putting broad framework in there that we would expect to still be relevant 10 or 15 or more years from now. Whereas an EDSP might have a shelf life more like 5 years. And that's where you're drilling down to some specific things that probably will be either done or irrelevant 5 years from now, but you've got them in that plan. Whereas the economic development element is intended to be broad enough that it's more or less going to still be relevant further in the future. And so some of the recommendations I showed on the presentation tonight would be more, would go beyond what you would want in a general plan, and would probably end up more in a strategic plan.
Thank you for that.
Mhm.
That's it from my questions at this point.
Thank you. Yeah, I've just got a couple of questions. Thank you for clarifying that the vacancy data may not be quite accurate. On packet page 50, we've got a marketplace vacancy of 3.6%, and the Crow Canyon Commons was at 7.5. I think both of those are considerably lower than what we've, I think, been hearing. And so my question for you is, can you shed any light for us on kind of the capture date of when that data was obtained and what the source was?
Well, there are different sources for different data. So we looked at sales tax data for the years 2019, 2020, and 2021.
Okay.
And the reason we went back to 2019 is we really wanted to understand what happened before the pandemic,
Right.
and then compare it to what's happened since then, because there was this kind of short-term dramatic dip in certain business categories, but we've seen that it's now mostly been fully recovered, in some cases better than it was before. So that was important to look at. In terms of the vacancy rate data, we relied on data from brokers, commercial real estate brokers. And so we have not gone out and inventoried and measured vacancies on the ground. And so, we'd kind of expect there to be a margin of error in those vacancy data, because it probably are, depending on the source, it probably would be like late 2021 would be probably when those data were captured, and maybe even third quarter 2021, because we've been working on this study for a while.
Okay.
So, and I would say, on the other hand, and not to, excuse the fact that there might be some inaccuracies here, we will definitely clean those up. But this is a study with a pretty long-term horizon, 2040. We definitely want to understand what's going on now because it may have some long-term consequences or implications. On the other hand, we would expect we're kind of trying to look at what's the long-term picture look like, assuming that there's going to be cycles up and down throughout, the economy, and sometimes vacancy rates are going to be higher, sometimes they're going to be lower. We're coming out of a period where we know that there have been stresses on retail through the pandemic in some cases. The question is, how much of those impacts are going to be permanent? Because it's not just a pandemic that happened to happen at a time when we already had changes going on in the retail industry. And so it's a little bit, it's impossible really to speculate what the trend is going to be over the next 20 years. But that's what I mentioned earlier. We've kind of built in wide margins here in our assumptions about capture rates and so forth, that we're assuming things are going to, in some ways, continue to get challenging. But even after discounting all the numbers for those factors, we're still ending up with theoretically some pretty big numbers for demand.
To that point, do you see a straight line between the population growth and retail demand?
I would say at this point, no. I mean, historically, yes. I would say though, if you were a community that was already maxed out, you captured 100% of your retail demand, and the population grows, it's probably going to be a lower per capita amount of square feet of retail than it was in the past, simply because we know trends are changing about the way people shop and buy more stuff, more of their things online and so forth. However, in a community like this that has this big amount of leakage, potentially it could be yes. And I mentioned this earlier when you took the City Ranch project, just built, I think, in a couple of years ago, or opened a couple of years ago, you wouldn't have necessarily expected that was more than a population growth increase. That was kind of a one-time jump up based on years of leakage that was being recaptured. So in a place like this where there's kind of this unmet demand, that a lot of it over the years, you could expect to, in some cases, have years where you exceed your population growth in terms of new retail space.
Okay.
So, but overall, if you kind of look at the whole country, if you will, figure the amount of retail spaces per capita, I would expect to go down. Yes, it's not going to be a one-for-one relationship of a new household to new retail space.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question was kind of a bigger picture, more general kind of question. And I'm hoping you can speak to this a little bit. The report talks about incentivizing reinvestment in shopping center, incentivizing tenant retention. During your presentation, you talked a bit about infrastructure improvements, loan and grant programs, and potentially supporting marketing efforts. Are there other specific things that you could that you have in mind when you're talking about incentives? And can you clarify or put a finer point on this concept of city-funded infrastructure improvements and how that connects up with improving the retail picture?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, the big picture, if you look at the concept of mixed-use development, that is potentially an incentive. It's not the city handing money to someone, but you're basically handing, by entitling property for something that's higher value than what exists now, you're adding value to that, you're enhancing the value of that property to the property owner. So that's potentially the biggest incentive the city can provide that doesn't have a fiscal impact to the city from writing someone a check. We know, and I understand there are all kinds of factors to consider there, and where is that appropriate to do and where is it not appropriate to do, and how do you balance that with the community's concerns. But when you think about considering entitlements for mixed-use development that can substantially enhance the value of land to a property owner, that could be considered or positioned as an incentive and some sort of a trade-off. You can get these entitlements for this if you retain retail on a portion of the site or commit to maintaining retail for a portion of the site. So that would be, in my mind, and it's a non-financial incentive, but potentially a very significant incentive.
Okay.
When you talked about other things like infrastructure, that would really be case specific. I mean, there are ways that cities can help structure infrastructure financing but not knowing what a project might need, I can't comment on that, but that's something, again, if there was something where a city could invest in infrastructure that would support reinvestment in a project that otherwise would be a cost absorbed by a developer, that would be an incentive.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, I have one more question as you're talking. You can explain. So today we have roughly 2.7 million in retail, and there's a potential demand, 1 million plus or minus. And we also have policies that are encouraging mixed use, which sort of feels like that would make that 2.7 billion be less, some amount. How do you reconcile where are we going to put the retail, or how would we implement mixed use and grow our retail when we also are pretty land limited? So those three things just don't seem to click in my mind.
Well, I think you've raised a good point. I would say that if there's a message I would convey from those numbers, whether it's 1.1 million, the low scenario, 1.8 million, the high scenario, those are probably not, you're probably never going to achieve even the low scenario in terms of where do you put it. But the message, though, it's still important to know that you've got that demand, because the message is that there is still some underlying opportunity to work with to retain your existing retail base, to not assume that it's just going to shrink over time, but that you do have some opportunity there to work with. And I think that's what's most important. What the actual number is, it probably isn't especially relevant in this case, because you just aren't ever going to have a place to put that. But what is relevant is the fact that there is this demand there that, with a strategic focus by the city, could be leveraged to maintain your retail footprint and maintain your sales tax base.
Okay, I can accept the demand is greater than zero, some number, and converting an existing shopping center to something that's mixed use would probably result in some amount of square foot less than zero. And that's where I'm trying to come through. Does that imply that, converting parts of shopping centers, we need to do something with the existing retail to make it, we have 500,000 square feet left over and we need to make it perform as if it was 1 million? Or there are policies that are baked in there that, in the recommendation that suggests that our retail space is incredibly valuable. And given that some of it's no doubt going to go away, that there's policies in place to maximize the value of the remaining retail.
That's right. And a lot of this crosses over into kind of planning and design. And so a little bit out of the realm of what I know about, but it's kind of a multi-pronged approach. We've kind of identified what the opportunities are. And now kind of the next step is the planning team working to define that in a way that is workable on the ground.
Thank you.
Follow-up question. So I'm looking on, again, packet page 50, the chart that shows vacancy rates of the existing shopping centers. And there's a couple of things that strike me as we're having this discussion. One is that the centers that have very high vacancy rates are in the parts of our town in which we seem to have an aging population. So the question then I have, I'm offering you the opportunity to comment on, is to what extent in your research about our retail development in general, accounts for things, the demographics such as an increasingly aging area, population areas, or in the life of San Ramon, we have the Doherty Valley area, which is culturally much more diverse than the more traditional parts of San Ramon, which relates to the ages of these shopping centers. So I'm trying to kind of figure out, is that an avenue that we should be researching as well in looking at retail trends 10, 15, 20 years in the life of the city?
I think it is. It's not something we have gone into great depth here. I mean, we have, what the demographics are today are not necessarily going to be the same especially if you're thinking of different types of housing coming into the city in future years. It could result in a younger demographic and a more diverse community. So, but we have not specifically factored that in. I think that would be especially appropriate at kind of a center by center look at these things, where they're located, what the existing demographics are, where that's how they're located in proximity to where new housing is likely to go in, either on site or in the vicinity. But so those are, I think, very good questions to ask it for individual property, but we haven't specifically done that as part of this analysis.
Thank you.
Okay, we've asked lots of questions and comments and side questions. What other comments might you have specifically around the policies or the updated, the red line, or other things that have popped into your mind that you want to? Okay, go ahead.
I
Commissioner
have a couple questions on the red line sections of the policies, if we could go there, if I can find my page. Thank you. So just a couple of comments. I'm on packet page 13, which is one of the new policies. 2.3119. I think that's the designation, the last one. Where it says establish a system for ongoing coordination. I guess the question, when I read that, it seemed to me like what you really were hoping for is to establish a system for accountability and or transparency rather than coordination. So that was just some thought on that one. And then the other comment on packet page 14, implementing policy 3, which is 2.3 dash, I don't know if it's an I or a 1, sorry, 22, where it says through proactive economic development. I feel like I'm channeling Rick Marks here. Some more active language and just say create proactive economic development marketing. So those were just a couple of comments on the red line items that I would offer to staff to ponder more.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I've just got one comment also on packet page 13 with implementing policy 2.3 I11. We've got a reference in here to preparing development standards to address the proportion of non-commercial development allowed in the course of shopping center revitalization. I'm not sure what we're referencing there with development standards. I originally thought that we were talking about like objective design standards. But it now appears that this is a little bit either more nuanced than that or just different than that. So I suggest that kind of be clarified a little bit. I think that it's important that we have, the objective design and development standards, but I don't know how much we want to dictate from a policy perspective, like the proportion of the residential in a mixed use project, right? Is it horizontal mixed use or is it vertical mixed use? Is it office and retail? Is it office and residential or some combination of those things? And part of this, I think, has to be left for the market. And I think we kind of want to have as much flexibility as we can. So that's kind of those were my concerns about that, particularly implementing policy.
Well, I'm going to say one thing. Most of what we have in the general plan economic development and the EDSP are spot on. It really, not just because I help work on it, but because they really are tremendously good things. Everything that we heard about tonight, like whether it's business outreach, there's a policy in there or a goal in there to do those things. So I don't think there's a lot that we need to change in the general plan. Goal A, if you're not familiar with EDSP, is maintain and enhance existing firms and attract new employers to Santa Rosa. There's A through Z implementing strategies to do everything from business outreach to working with tenants to evaluating business improvement districts. So there's not a lot that we haven't thought about over the years to do. So I think that's a really good document. But there's a but, because I also, just in March of this year, we got an update on the general plan, and I went back and read all of the things that we did, and there weren't as many activities related to some of the goals that we have set out that I would like to see, and I think I know why, and of course I know why. And I'm not sure if it's worthy of elevating to a general plan level policy, but a couple came to mind, and they're captured in here. So it's not like they're new, but it's to maintain a strong economic development function within the city of San Ramon. It's maintain a strong marketing outreach plan. And those concepts are captured, but I don't think they're strong enough to really enforce that they actually get done to the extent I think the city needs. And my questions on, we're losing retail space to housing. Some is likely to happen regardless of anything we say or do. And that leaves us with less retail. We really need to protect our retail and maximize what we get out of it as much as we possibly can. If we're trying to recapture anything, we can, that's one thing. So I was really pleased to see that there was a code enforcement working with shopping center owners element as a recommendation, because I think that works, because, that a resident, if they know about shopping in San Ramon and they load a shop local because we have a strong business and marketing outreach, and they go to the shopping center, it's well maintained, it's clean, it's pretty, they're going to go back a second time. Then the stores that are here appreciate the customers because A, customers are showing up, and B, the city has implemented an outreach program. It all works together. It's just two sides of the same question. And that protects our existing retail. But everything is in here. I just want to emphasize it's not new or anything like that. And then the marketing will do what we had, where we had the list of 2 pages of businesses that could come to the city. So I guess my sort of conclusion is the guiding policies for the general plan, the EDSP plan captures, I think, everything that the city should do for retail and protect our retail as the market evolves and changes. We just need to figure out a way to resource it to the level that most of those things get done. That's sort of my comments, but I think the plans are outstanding as basically as written. Other comments, questions? Okay, there's no action required on this tonight, is there?
No, there's none tonight.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go ahead and move on as soon as I can clean up my paper. Thank you for all the discussion tonight and all the input. Very, very helpful. My agenda.
I think you're on to staff commissioner comments and staff
Thank you.
liaison.
Thank you.
reports,
So
or one of the two.
anybody have any liaison reports? I do not.
Nor do I. The transportation committee meeting was canceled this
Okay.
week.
Okay, then it's back to you, Debbie, on coming attractions, or Cindy. Cindy gets coming attractions.
Sure. Lauren is on vacation, so I'm filling in for him. Much deserved vacation. As far as items for upcoming meetings, our next regularly scheduled meeting is August 2nd, and we do not have any items scheduled for that meeting. So it looks like we will be canceling that agenda. The next meeting after that will be August 16th. We do expect that we'll potentially be bringing additional general plan discussions for that August 16th meeting, and we're preparing those right now, but you can expect at least one evening free this August.
That's very nice. Okay. With no other comments, we'll go ahead and adjourn tonight's meeting at 8:19 PM.